Welcome to Minion. We are talking AFL Supercoach and AFL Fantasy today. Let's get into the show. Hello and welcome to Minion, your fantasy sports community. I'm your host, Blake, coach of the Youngies Yaks, and I'm joined by Clinton.
Coach of Dash's Dogs.
Yeah, you're up and about Dash's Dogs for our latest AFL Supercoach and AFL Fantasy show. Today we'll be covering our rucks and our midfielders for this podcast / YouTube. Wherever
No, you won't. Rucks and Forwards. You said rucks and midfielders.
Oh, there you go. Off to a good start. Rucks and forwards. I've been looking at my team every 5 minutes, just about, Clinton. So I've been looking at midfielders, defenders, the whole lot. So just need to concentrate on what the show's about today.
That's right, yes.
Wherever you're watching or listening to the show today, we're on Apple and Spotify podcasts and also on YouTube. So make sure you subscribe to the channel. We had a fair few viewers last week who casually viewed the show but didn't subscribe. So make sure you subscribe and like the show so you can stay up to date with our latest content. This is the third show we're doing now for AFL Fantasy and AFL Supercoach. So follow us on the socials, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure you subscribe to our Patreon as well, Clinton, because that's where it's all happening in terms of our prize leagues, where you can win up to $500 if you win our Supercoach group and our fantasy league. So the overall winner for those, $250 each, Clinton. Do you want to go into some more detail about our Patreon?
Oh, yeah, obviously for as little as $3 per month, you can join us in our community and be in the running for that prize money. And on top of that, you can join Discord and join the group chats about it all. Hopefully we can gain some momentum with what we're doing, Blake. As we've discussed previously, we're two brothers who enjoy their fantasy sports, and we're looking forward to getting things up and about for this upcoming season. So if you're listening or watching this show, if you're interested, pass it on to others that enjoy it, because we're trying to get some more people involved, and you've got to be in it to win it, as I said to you. And I'm looking forward to it. I'm not sure if you mentioned, but you're on Twitter flat out, aren't you, Blake? You're on Instagram, on the TikToks.
Yeah, and TikTok went off. Your favorite TikTok went off during the week, Clinton. It was good. Good.
Yeah, so I think ultimately what we're doing now is, it's for not much per month. You can join our community and support the show. You do a lot of work behind the scenes, Blake, to get this up and going. So this is all for you. And then, as mentioned previously, a portion of that money, 10% of the Patreon money, will go towards something that's really meaningful to us in Down syndrome Victoria. Obviously, we've got a brother with Down syndrome, and it meant a lot to us to donate come season's end. Hopefully a fair bit of money towards that. And so I think we'll discuss that maybe more so just before we start the season next week, about that in more detail and how people who are patrons can help support that.
Yeah, well said, Clinton. You're right. It's only a week till round one till we kick off. So very exciting. The link for that is www.patreon.com/Minion Fantasy Sports Community. So check that out on there and subscribe. As soon as you subscribe, when I first get a chance, I will send you an email which will have the codes for the prize leagues and also the links to the Discord chat. So make sure, if you are a subscriber to Patreon, you do go on to those groups and the chats and join them. So we'll just quickly run through some names, Clinton, who joined the Patreon over the last week. So you might be able to help me with a couple of names here. Stephen Ciali, Patreon subscriber today. Jeff Fegan. Yeah, Fegan. Our brother Mitchell Young joined the Patreon subscribers this week, and also James Galley as well. So thank you for supporting the show, and hopefully your AFL Fantasy and Supercoach teams go well this year. But thank you for joining on there. Any questions?
Who does James support?
He's a Bombers supporter.
Okay.
One of my fellow Bombers supporters, very passionate. So hopefully
Bit of a mix there. Jeff's a Brisbane supporter. Stephen's very, very passionate Geelong supporter, and our brother Mitchell's a very passionate Bulldog supporter. So bit of variety.
Yeah, they're definitely passionate supporters, Mitchell and James, from my knowledge, and even Stephen. He sends a few messages through to the groups about Geelong. So very good. Hopefully, we look forward to chatting to you about your teams and everything throughout the season.
One more thing for me, Blake. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. Go for it.
For those who are watching and listening to this for the first time, we are called Minyip. That's the hometown that we're from. And it so happens to be this weekend, they're celebrating 150 years as a town and community. So we're both going back home to Minyip this weekend. And yeah, it means a lot to us to go back. And so we'll be catching up with a lot of people from Minyip. So it's going to be big festivals, big gathering in Minyip. So the town will be going absolutely crazy. So what a lead up to round one that we get the privilege to go back to Minyip, our namesake. And yeah, it'll be great to see the family back there.
Yeah, I saw on Facebook, they've got a new town sign as you enter in Clinton. So you might be able to take a photo of that one as well. We've got one picture up on our socials, a backdrop picture, but make sure to take a picture of the new sign as you go into the town as well.
And with that, in terms of the Patreon, there's obviously different tiers, the amount you can support the show, and they're named after the streets of Minyip. For those that are really fascinated, like I'm sure people are just really wondering why they are called certain names on our Patreon page. But yes, they are the main streets of Minyip and the streets that mean a lot to us.
Absolutely. We lived on a couple of them, but
yes.
they're pretty common names. The Main Street, Market Street, Church Street. They're pretty common, but that's in case you were wondering. Yeah, Bailey was pretty excited. Other Patreon, Bailey, our nephew, he was very excited to see the street names up there when he subscribed to our Patreon.
Hopefully we'll start getting some more people who aren't our family and to be signing up as Patreon, so we don't have to talk about a family every week. But hopefully by next week you can start rattling off some names who aren't related to us.
Yeah, shout out to Bailey and Mitchell. Thanks for joining.
Yeah.
Yes. That's all I had to say about that for just our intro, Clinton. Any changes for your backline and midfield? Any big changes over the last week?
Oh, absolutely. I don't always.
Just tell me one or two big names of inclusions or outs.
I like the look of Chapman for Fremantle. I'm not 100% sure if he'll end up in my team, but I'm very tempted by him. George Hewitt is a recent inclusion. That's it from Carlton.
That's it for Carlton.
I'm not sure if you want to bring up anyone else. Let's talk. We're here to talk about rucks and forwards, Blake. That's the exact name I wanted to hear. Let's wait to the end, and we'll talk about more of those players at the end. How about that?
Why do you think I asked the question in the first place?
Oh no, we'll hold that. Let's talk about the rucks and forwards. Otherwise, I'll be talking about
the first quarter, 5 tackles, 12 disposals and a goal. Straight into your team, Clinton, after last week's.
I'm looking forward to debriefing all that. Yep.
Let's get started with the rucks, Clinton. So pretty much we'll start with the premiums. Obviously, the obvious choices, if you can afford them, would be Gawn and Grundy. The only real risk to Gawn is Luke Jackson getting more centre bounce attendances, but even in the preseason, he was all across the ground taking intercept marks, even in the back line. So I don't see that as being too much of a risk. He's still in his prime. So Gawn and Grundy are the clear options, but it's just whether you want to spend that much. I can't see any other faults in Grundy, Clinton.
Definitely the two that I'm looking at starting. There's no doubt about that. They're both very expensive, but I think they'll justify, and especially Grundy might even make a mockery of his starting price for both formats. The other two I want to mention is obviously Sean Darcy, and the other one I want to mention in this category is Rowan Marshall. So Sean Darcy, in more so in Supercoach, I think he's really relevant. Obviously, the big question is his durability, and if he can. Obviously, he played majority of last year and dominated, especially the second half. So if he can remain fit, I think it's justified to choose him over probably more so Max. I think Grundy's more of the must-have, but that's up to everyone's own thoughts. But the other one, as I said, was Rowan Marshall, and I'm looking at him probably more so in AFL Fantasy. With Ryder not potentially starting for a while at the start of the season, I think he's going to be a very high scorer early as well. So a lot depends on Paddy Ryder, but I'm very tempted by Rowan Marshall. But it's hard to go past the first two names we mentioned in Supercoach especially. But yeah, I'm really tempted by Marshall in AFL Fantasy. So yeah, it's a bit of thinking to do, and obviously we'll wait and see teams as they come through.
The other high price ruckman that I'm considering for fantasy, Clinton, is Riley O'Brien. He's had a good preseason. He's scored well in the preseason matches. He's going to be the number one ruck, and I think they'll have a better midfield than what they did last season if they can stay fit, tapping down to the likes of Crouch for most of the season. So the other one I'm considering for fantasy is Riley O'Brien there, Clinton.
Yep, that's fair enough, but it's an avoid from me. But yeah, I'm going either premium or the next name we should mention is Braden Pruce. Obviously suspended for round one. So it's definitely a known AFL Fantasy. But in terms of Supercoach, I'm still definitely tempted to keep him at R3. And yeah, it's just whether how my team shapes up and if I want to do that. If I'm looking for a bit more money elsewhere for one specific player, I may get rid of him. But personally speaking, I think he'll come into the team round two and be the more dominant ruckman at GWS. Obviously, there's doubts over that, but he's a player that I think will potentially, due to suspension, no one will pick him. Some people will, but I think come round three, after a couple of rounds of scoring well, everyone will be trying to get him into the team. So, yeah, he's one that I'm very tempted to start at R3.
Yeah, that's a good segue into our Twitter question. I've just put a question up on our Twitter to see if anyone had any questions about their team. And Aaron, one of our patrons, sent through that he'd love to know if it's worth having Pruce at R3 even if he misses round one. So you've answered that one for us, Clinton. And the other question he had was, is Jared Witts a good option at R2? And in my opinion, he is. I think he's the best mid-price option ruck-wise. He's got good scoring potential as demonstrated in previous seasons. He's obviously coming off a knee injury, but just a quick stat, I think it was posted by Azza, one of the big fantasy sports communities content providers, Azza. He provided a stat of points per minute for Supercoach over the weekend for the preseason matches, Clinton. Jared Witts scored 97 from only 54% time on ground. He scored 1.4 Supercoach points per minute. So,
yeah, I think there's a lot of variances with certain opposition, how much they were trying throughout the last couple of weeks. So, and you can twist any stat the way you like throughout the last couple of weeks. So there's, for example, Paddy Cripps. But I think there's, yeah, in my opinion, I think he's a justifiable start, but potentially, yeah, he may be going up in price slightly, but are you sure how long are you going to keep Witsy all year compared to the other names that we've mentioned? I'm not sure. Not sure if it's worthwhile, but I don't think he'll score as freely as those guys.
He's probably the best mid-price option, though.
No doubt, but depends where you sit. Rowan Marshall
depends
in that category
where you can afford him.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the other options for the ruck for R3 positions are probably the new players that just got signed last week, I believe, in Hugh Dixon, and the other one was Jack Hayes. For St Kilda. They're both ruck forwards at 102k in Supercoach, so 190 in fantasy. So they're both bargain basements. Dixon potentially could be playing some early minutes there with the likes of Darling and the other injuries that West Coast have had. So he potentially might be getting a game early, and he might be a good loopholing option throughout the season for Supercoach.
With Jack Hayes and Dixon, they've both got the ruck forward swing, which is handy. So I think that's a lot of people will be going the double with those guys so they can flip them around. Throughout the preseason, Comben and Sam Hayes, I think it is, at Port Adelaide, they were the talked about cheap rucks, but now I think they've both been surpassed by these recent additions. And yeah, it's just quite, it all depends on everyone's teams and how they're juggling the money. If you're trying to potentially slot Bruce in there like I am, but yeah, I think that will be the main ruck duo that people can swing around, Hayes and Dixon for sure.
Yeah, there's no other rucks that I would like to discuss, Clinton.
Same.
If you're happy to move on to the forwards. A good segue into a player who I think will be getting ruck eligibility very shortly for fantasy and Supercoach and is at a low price is Cherry from North Melbourne. He's at about 200k for Supercoach, and so he's a cheap option. The big surprise was that he was playing as their number one ruck in the latest preseason game. So if he can keep that up at that price, it'd be definitely good value, and he'll be getting ruck eligibility very soon, I'd say.
I like the pick. The big question is whether or not they were just resting Goldie a little bit more in that last game. So I think it's a worthwhile start. And then after the first 2 weeks, if it's looking pear-shaped, you can flick him for someone else. But I think it's a worthwhile start. So, yeah, I'm leaning that way too. That's a good segue you've done there. But now let's go to the premiums. So, yeah, the main one for me is Dunkley. He was someone at the start of the preseason I had him there no matter what. And then about 2 weeks ago, I was debating taking him out for different options just with the Bulldogs midfield. But I think he's proven the last couple of weeks he's back to his best. And I think he's going to have the role for him to score well. So I think he's a must for both formats.
My biggest issue is having cash to spend in my forward line. I think it's probably the line where you can find the most value. And so at this stage, I don't have too many premium options for my forward line for both formats. But another one I am strongly considering is Dustin Martin because of the amount of midfield minutes I think he'll be playing this season. His body looks to be fit. I think he can return to his usual best form, playing predominantly midfield.
The thing about him is I think he's potentially a good one for AFL Fantasy. With Supercoach, I just question sometimes his efficiency. I think he'll get a fair bit of the ball. It's just, for me, it's a bit of a question as to how much will that actually be contested these days and his efficiency. So obviously a superstar player, but with other options, he's someone I'm happy to bypass.
Yeah, in saying that, he is in my fantasy team and not my Supercoach.
Yeah. Zach Butters is the next player I'd like to mention. He's obviously had a pretty disappointing year last year with his injuries, but now he looks ready to go. Here's another player that a couple of weeks ago I was debating whether or not to pick him due to the fact that he has a very kamikaze style way of playing, and I just question if he's going to hurt himself again. But there's every chance there's chance of that because he does play like that, which is obviously get a lot of respect. But he's the chance of really hurting himself. So we'll see how that goes. But I'm starting him. I think he's going to have that perfect role to impact, whether it be majority of midfield or more across half forward. But I think he's definitely a starting pick for both formats. Yeah,
it's especially in Supercoach, it's a very interesting price point around this sort of 430 to 480 price point. There's a lot of players there that should be considered. Treloar, he's 483k in Supercoach, mid forward. I had him in my team pretty much the whole way until about last week, where he hurt his shoulder a little bit. I think he's on track to still play round one, but it made me remember his durability. He has had soft tissue injuries in the past, and it's quite a risky price to select someone, especially when there's other options around that price point. When you look at Zach Bailey, should be getting all midfield minutes this season for Brisbane, Taron Thomas for North Melbourne, and Isaac Heaney as well. He's not currently in my team. He was until about a week ago when Papley got injured. So in terms of the role change, I think Heaney needs to play forward now for Sydney and play that sort of Papley role. So I think Heaney's going to be a bit of a trap this season personally, but I can definitely understand why he's still in a lot of teams.
All those names you just mentioned I like as players, but I think right now I won't start and then potentially see the first month go. So, I think different stages, they were definitely floating around in my team, but I don't have any of those guys for now. And the one more I'd mention in that same category is kind of Rosie. So I've already got Butters. Rosie, I think he's a player I started last year. And
did he get injured over the weekend?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I think he had a pretty strong game. So he's at a bit of a cheaper price than Butters. It's just a question of how many midfield minutes they'll be splitting. But I think he's someone who I think will go up in price, and I think he'll start the season off well. It's just a question of how consistent he can be. But I do like him as a player. I think he'll have a good season.
Yeah, I was just checking up about that injury. Do you want to say another player, Declan?
Sure. The next bracket is quite cluttered. The one more name I want to mention is Cornelio at the Giants. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning him right now is because in terms of Supercoach, he's 261, but in AFL Fantasy, he's 695, so he's a pretty hefty price. There's a large bunch of players I'm about to mention who are cheap across both formats, but Cornelio is definitely cheap in Supercoach. Not so much AFL Fantasy, but I think he's justified. If you've seen the Giants play the last 2 weeks, it's the Cornelio that we saw a few years ago. So in the forward line, he's the one I think for sure I'm starting, and I think he's going to have a great start to the year, especially. Just hopefully he can sustain the form and stay on the field.
Yeah, so there's a lot of players around this price bracket as well. That's why I think the forward line is the position where you can find some value. In my team, I've currently got West from West Coast. I think he'll be playing early. There's the likes of Will Brodie. He looks like he's going to get a game early for Fremantle. Charlie Curnow returning from injury, and Stengel is another one, which is a bit of a differential at the moment, but I think he can play a pretty crucial role in Geelong's forward line, and he's still very cheap after Geelong picked him up.
Okay, yeah, I'm not on that bandwagon, but good luck if you are. Curnow, I think, was all the rage about a month ago. Pretty similar to Rayner, but I think Rayner's, I think they've jumped off that train pretty quick, all the people who are on that bandwagon. But I think Will Brodie, I'm keen on at the start of the year. I think he's someone who I'm prepared to start, and then similar to what we said before, in a couple of weeks, if he's not really getting that role consistently, I think we may be able to swap him out. But I think he's a starter. The next few names I'll mention is Mcgovern. Obviously impressed down back in a change of role. I think he's someone who should, especially with his marking ability, score pretty well. Ralph Smith looks like he's playing well for the Tigers. Just a question if he's going to be best 22, but looks that way. So I think he's going to be a good option. Rochelle is a more expensive rookie that has obviously been dominated the last 2 weeks. I think he's a must start. And I'm not sure if we mentioned in the backs or not, but Mcgovern has come out of nowhere with his last couple of weeks and looks like he's going to be a great starting pick. So looks as though he's going to be best 22. So I'm looking forward to starting him as well.
Yeah, I dare say he'll be pretty much in everyone's defensive line, just with a lack of rookies there for defenders. So you got
Spot on.
McCartan and De Koning for Geelong.
Yep.
They'll be pretty much in everyone's backline bench, I'd imagine, if not on the field. They're both defender forward. So if you wanted to start one on the forward line and have that movement there, it's an interesting option. But just due to the lack of rookies and defenders, they'll probably be in the defensive line. You've pretty much said every player that I've been considering, Clinton. I don't have too many more names to say there. How about you?
The other, depends of how you're juggling your team, but obviously we're paying up for quite a few of these, and it's just whether or not you start them on the bench, especially on Supercoach. If you're paying $200,000 for a player, yes, just it doesn't feel right to start them on the bench. But another player I'll mention with the Collingwood injuries, I'm not sure if Will Kelly will potentially get a game, and he potentially could be down back also, as you mentioned those names previously. But he's someone that I'm keeping an eye out on selection. And then the other one at the Bombers, who I thought you might have mentioned, is Martin. So he's really cheap, Supercoach, 102, and obviously basement price at AFL Fantasy. But he's just one to watch also. Best 22 is debatable, but I think if we're in terms of, as I just said about the pricing, you can't. It's going to be difficult to have all those players who are a bit more expensive. So he might be the cheap one to get.
Yeah, there's Baldwin as well for Essendon. They played pretty well, but I don't think they'll get a game round one. I think Shield and Stringer will be back, and there's a couple of other names as well that were rested. So I don't think they'll be in the best 22, and even if they are round one, I don't trust that they'll be there for very long, to be honest. Obviously depending on injuries and everything, but they did play very well over the preseason. I think we've just about gone through every team. Some people were considering Willie Rioli, but there's, as we mentioned last week, Clinton, it's about the role they're playing. For forward line, you want them to either be a tall marking forward kicking a lot of goals, like Franklin used to be a very good Supercoach and fantasy option, and Rewalt back in the day, or you want them to be playing a lot of midfield minutes so that they get their scoring up and disposals that way. If they're not playing that role, there wouldn't be too many options on our list that aren't playing one of those roles.
Yep, fair enough. As mentioned previously, I think there's always going to be a player that pops up that we least expect. And last year was Aaron Hall after about a month, and Taylor Walker started like the house on fire. So there's going to be some surprises, and it's just being able to adjust. And in terms of obviously AFL Fantasy, you have a couple of trades per week to make those changes. But in Supercoach, we've got the luxury of a few more trades and boosts and all these other things that are happening this year. So I think it's pretty exciting to get the season started. And the starting team is obviously very, very important, but then the ability to make the moves when it really matters.
I'm just looking at some of the ownership stats, Clinton. Elijah Hollins is still in 44% of teams. Rayner, I don't know. Did you mention Rayner?
I've mentioned the name, how he was popular and now shouldn't be. Mm.
Yep, he's still in 22% of teams.
That's Supercoach, obviously,
Yeah. Tim Torreno's in a lot of teams, obviously, but I think he's going to be playing more of a forward line role this year, even though he did score well. Jade Gresham is another highly owned player. So, yeah, there are definitely some interesting names to consider there. It wouldn't surprise me if De Goey scored well as well, but just for morally, I'm not selecting him. We'll leave that topic for another day. Coleman's still in a lot of teams. It was just announced today that he's going to miss 8 to 10 weeks. So he'll be going out of a lot of teams. And Pedler as well for Adelaide. He's picked up a preseason injury. So people will be transferring him out.
I'm not sure if we mentioned it properly earlier, but obviously it's difficult as we're mentioning names, talking about prizes, etc. But from next week, we'll be recording separate shows for both Supercoach and AFL Fantasy. So I think it'll be clearer for the listeners if you have a preferred format. We'll be separating the show so we can concentrate more on the prices and say them with confidence and no hesitation about different prices. So because very different formats with how the trades work. I'm looking forward to concentrating on each format next week.
Yeah, the ownerships are pretty similar. Now I'm looking at the fantasy. Elijah Holland's still in 40% of fantasy teams. Interesting one. Maurice Rioli's in 12% of teams currently for fantasy, Clinton.
Well, there you go.
And
someone knows more than us.
There's some interesting names. I think people are doing some auto selects or something. Eli Smith's in 15%. Jai Sarong's in 11%. Some interesting names that are in a lot of teams, but maybe a bit of auto selecting or something just to fill in the rookies.
Perhaps.
Yeah. That's all I've got to cover in terms of our Rucks and Forwards, like we already mentioned on the show. Make sure you follow us on the socials and check out our Patreon as well. Subscribe to that to go into the prize leagues, and we'll send you an email promptly once you subscribe to that. That's all I've got for you, Clinton.
Obviously, we mentioned earlier about touching on midfielders, etc. I've got a random question for you, Blake. Saves people good. Sending it in. If you were to choose one out of Petrarca, Josh Kelly, or Andrew Brayshaw, who would you pick in your team?
In my team personally, I've been strongly considering Brayshaw based off the way he finished off last season. Obviously, Petrarca finished off pretty well last season as well, but I think Brayshaw will be playing just flat-out midfield minutes, whereas Josh Kelly, he's done this to me a couple of times where I've selected him and he's got off to a slow start or he's picked up an injury. So he's one that's personally, he's hurt me a couple of times before. So it's
a dilemma for my...
He's a very good player to watch. Obviously, he's very silky smooth. And if you like watching players like that, obviously you'd select them in your team after the preseason form that he just showed.
That's my current dilemma in my team. That's what I've been deliberating over today. So I've got one more for you.
Okay, hit me.
Hewitt or Cripps? If you could juggle your team around, which one would you pick in your team? Obviously different lines, but if you were juggling your team and wanted one of those Carlton players, George Hewitt or Patrick Cripps, who would you have in your team?
Very well, considering Hewitt is a defender, I'd probably say Hewitt, based on that he's got that mid-price
good answer.
Defensive role.
Yeah.
In terms of scoring, Cripps will outscore Hewitt, but at that price point, Hewitt should be in just about every team because he's one of the very few mid-price options that's quite obvious in defence.
But in saying that, they both have their risks. So I think there's a possibility that Hewitt
doesn't outscore Cripps.
No, hang on a second. I'm just saying that Hewitt, there's a chance that may get, depending on the game, may get allocated a defensive role, and he chasing the ball may not be as important. Cripps will score well early. I'm predicting that, especially the first month. When Walsh returns, when the season starts getting into a bit of the grind phase, after about 6 weeks, that's where I'm not as confident that Cripps will score as well. So he may very well do Ollie Wines from last year and just be a bull and dominate all year. But that's the doubt that I have over him. So I thought I'd just throw that up to you and see what you thought on those
but
two.
if you're saying he's going to perform like that for a month, he'll still probably go up 100k in each format, and you'll be able to. And if Walsh does come back and impact on his role, then you could probably slide swap him the amount he's going up.
Possibly, but you can only do that for so many players. Every single player in your team. Yeah, no, it's a good point. But I think, what about Rail? If you had the choice, Rail or Cripps?
That's a very interesting one. I'd still go Cripps because I don't trust Rail at this stage. He hasn't done enough to prove his scoring capability, whereas Cripps is a previous. What did he score last year? Yeah, Rail's had 4 good games 2 years ago, whereas Cripps was a previous 117 plus average for 3 seasons in a row.
Bit harsh there, but I'm back in Rail. So I think
Noah Anderson can take away from Rail a bit this year.
But you're saying Rail hasn't played many games, so yeah.
He played a fair few games last year, just didn't score.
Yeah, it's what injuries do to players. They're not robots. And just like Butters, he was playing injured. There's players that put up with a fair bit of injury, as Cripps did last year.
In saying that, Rail and Cripps are both in my team.
Yeah. No, it's just a good conversation. I've got one more for you. Horn Francis, yes or no?
Quite obvious, yes.
Okay. I'm seeing a lot of teams with him not in there, so I was just curious to know.
I wouldn't swap him out for anyone else that's around that price point besides Dacos. Dacos
he's a lock. He's a lock for me too, but yeah, I'm seeing some teams with not in.
I think Dacos is definitely probably he'd be the number one around that price point, and then Horn Francis after that.
The other name I mentioned is, we're talking a bit of dribble here. One more for you, Blake.
Hit me.
I originally had Lloyd for a long time. He's out of my team now. And just juggling around the money. And yeah, so I've got a couple more defensive rookies that I didn't think I was going to choose in Hinge and Gibkiss in my team. So yeah, I'm just juggling the money. I originally had a pretty strong back line, so I've got currently don't have any Stewart or Lloyd. Everyone's team is different, so it's still a few days to go. But anyway, we're dribbling on now, Blake.
I don't like the role that Gibkiss was playing in preseason. I thought he was playing more of a lockdown personally. Someone who around that, just above that price, who is not playing a lockdown role and they might look to give the ball to him, is Bowie for Melbourne. I think he could very easily average around 75, 80, and at that price, there's not that many defenders to select from at the cheap options. And 75, 80 each week could be very helpful.
Yep. Well, good points. Well done.
Yeah. All right. Enough of that dribble.
Let's wrap it up.
Enough of the dribble. All right. Thanks for joining us on the podcast or YouTube, wherever you're watching us. And we look forward to seeing you next week for our team reveal show just prior to round 1. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you can check out our show then. Thank you.
When's that, Blake? Monday night?
I believe we'll do it Monday. So round 1 starts on the Wednesday. Hopefully we'll do that Monday night recording, Clinton, and get that out to the community prior to round 1.
Despite I'll be making another 10 changes between Monday and Wednesday, but
no doubt my team will look completely different by then. But yeah, well, and there's no preseason matches to interrupt us between then. Nothing should change from now to then, but no doubt our teams will look completely different.
All good, Blake.
That's all right, mate. We'll see you next show. Thank you.